A couple of weeks ago, there was a bit of a hoo-ha on social media because of a statement made by Elon Musk on X, in which Musk described the F-35 as, quote, a shit design, and that, quote, some idiots are still building manned fighter jets like the F-35. And this well and truly set the cat amongst the proverbial pigeons, sparking a great debate between those who follow Musk's advocacy for unmanned aircraft and drones and those who pointed out that Musk has little knowledge about what he is talking about in terms of military aircraft doctrine, planning, or capabilities. Regardless of this, Musk's opinion will likely be taken seriously. He does, after all, have a proven track record of getting things done in high technology fields that were considered unfeasible. He also has a tremendous amount of clout in terms of how much support he enjoys with a substantial portion of the general public. It also seems that he now holds a position in the US government where he will be overseeing spending and, more to the point, cuts, which means his comments about the F-35 should definitely be taken very seriously. Now, I am not going to wade into the argument on the F-35. There are lots of other, far better qualified people out there who have already done that. Plus, I suspect people have often made up their minds on the subject already. But it does seem to be the perfect opportunity to bring up an event from military history that has some parallels with this discussion and which potentially offers us the ability to draw conclusions from past experiences and therefore potentially avoid mistakes that have occurred before. I am talking, obviously, about the French Navy in the latter half of the 19th century.
Huh?
Bear with me because I think the comparison is pretty good. In the 19th century, naval power was the ultimate expression of a nation state's might. That's why the British were able to dominate so much of the globe in that period. The Royal Navy overmatched everyone else. Alright, it is a bit more complex than that, but underpinning the entire British Empire was a navy that no other power could challenge, giving the British free rein in global trade and dominance. But the 19th century was a period of exceptional technological development. If we look at a snapshot of the mightiest warships throughout that century, the rapid evolution is plain to see. HMS Victory, commissioned in 1778 and Nelson's flagship at Trafalgar in 1805, it is a great example of the sort of ship of the line that represented the culmination of warship development during the Age of Sail. The Napoleon, launched by the French in 1850, this was the first purpose-built battleship with steam-powered propulsion. The Gloire, again commissioned by France, this time in 1859, the Gloire was the world's first ocean-going ironclad battleship. The USS Monitor, though only a coastal design, the USS Monitor of 1862 helped establish the principles of the turret for holding a warship's primary armament and relying on steam propulsion alone. HMS Devastation, built by the British and commissioned in 1873, this ship was the first ocean-going battleship to dispense with sails completely and to mount her main armament in two turrets fore and aft on top of the hull, rather than an internal gun battery. Over the next 20 years, this basic design evolved into what we now call the pre-dreadnought battleships. But while this development went hand in hand with technological advancement, those same advancements were causing some to re-evaluate whether the big battleship was the right choice at all, and that perhaps new technology would allow what today we would call a disruption, a radical change to the established technological order. And naturally, it was the French who ran with this. The French throughout the 19th century had a real problem. A burgeoning colonial power, they repeatedly run up against British hegemony on the seas, which on several occasions that century caused them a great deal of domestic and international grief. And whenever the French tried to build to match the strength of the Royal Navy, or else introduced new innovations in their ocean-going fleet to try to counter them, the British rushed to outbuild them to maintain their naval dominance. The problem for France was that they had both to contend at sea with Britain, but also were a continental power with long land borders and, as the century wore on, increasingly aggressive neighbours looking to displace them. Put simply, they couldn't afford to be both a sea and land power. But the advances in technology and science opened other possibilities other than revolutionising big battleships. Initially, hopes were placed in the development of the flat trajectory high explosive shell, which was developed by a French general of artillery, Henri Joseph Perrin. In 1824, the French conducted a trial where a decommissioned ship of the line, the Pacificateur, was subjected to a brief bombardment by cannon firing Pahan's new shell design. You can think of it as the 19th century equivalent to Billy Mitchell's bombers versus battleship demonstration, causing a similar shock, though perhaps less controversial. Because after a very short bombardment, the Pacificateur broke apart and sank, demonstrating that the explosive shell was going to be the standard for naval armaments in the future. Pahan also came up with a new theory that small steam powered ships equipped with a small number of guns firing his new shells would render the existing battle fleets obsolete. The battleship was dead. Except it wasn't, because though Pahan's guns proved devastating against the wooden ships of the day, this was soon enough countered by the deployment of iron armour on the ship's hulls, and then, from HMS Warrior onwards, the construction of iron-built capital ships. Pahan had indeed ushered in a naval revolution, but not the one he thought because, as an army general, not a naval strategist, he didn't really understand the purpose of naval combat or dominance. Instead, the small ships he envisaged had a short day of potential usefulness and then were displaced by big ships that could carry more armour and bigger guns than they could. However, Pahan's ideas on using new technology to leverage advantage against a more powerful naval opponent really took roots, and even as shell-firing guns and armour became the norm, a new weapon was being developed that would once again herald the end of the battleship: the torpedo. This came in two flavours: spar and locomotive. The spar torpedo was essentially an explosive charge fixed to a long pole that you could stick way out in front of your ship and then ram into the enemy, a weapon that saw a fair bit of use during the US Civil War of 1861-65 and for the following 20 years. This further evolved in 1866 when Robert Whitehead perfected the first self-propelled torpedo, and again the possibilities it offered were quickly grasped. While warships of that time were now often armoured in thick sheets of iron for protection from shell fire, their hulls were now vulnerable to attack from these new weapons that could blow a hole at or below their waterlines. And torpedoes of both types could be used from small, fast boats that seemed to offer the possibility of, once again, rendering the huge and expensive battleship not just horribly vulnerable, but obsolete. After all, their big guns were designed to hammer other battleships or shore positions out of existence, not engage tiny fast-moving fleas that could dart around evasively, but still deliver a lethal bite. And it was this that led to the creation of the Jeune Ecole, the young school, who believed and advocated for the abandonment of conventional battle fleets and concentration on the building of small, fast, and most importantly, inexpensive torpedo boats. This, advocates of the theory firmly stated, would allow the French to not just overmatch the Royal Navy, but do it at bargain basement rates. The theory was that fleets of small, fast torpedo boats could handle coastal protection, while powerful cruisers could be used to roam the high seas, attacking Britain's international trade. This would render British naval supremacy moot, as the Royal Navy would not be able to conduct a close blockade of the French coastline or their territories for fear of attack from torpedo boats, while their expensive battle fleet would not be able to deal with the ravages of France's marauding long-range cruiser squadrons, which could outfight anything lighter than them while evading anything bigger. The Jeune Ecole, while very much favoured by many younger officers of the French Navy, wasn't just an idea advocated by those lacking experience of naval matters. One of their principal supporters was Admiral Aube. Aube, who was the French Minister of Marine from 1886 until mid-87, i.e. boss of the entire French Navy and maritime policy, was so enamoured with the notion of torpedo boats and cruisers being the future that he ordered the halting of production of the latest French battleships on the slipways at that time. As Dr. Alexander Clark says on his video lecture on the Jeune Ecole, which I'll link to at the end, that is not something you just reverse. It indelibly affects not just those articles that are being stopped, it massively impacts future construction if you switch policy back in the future. Essentially, the ability to manufacture complex systems only lasts while there is demand. Take that away and you basically lose the capability, even if the suspension is just for a short period, and it is generally extremely expensive to reacquire. But anyway, I am getting ahead of myself, and at the time Orb was very much in line with the trend in attitudes in France. Because the call to reform the French Navy and switch focus onto smaller torpedo armed boats and cruisers away from lumbering armoured behemoths was being trumpeted by, among others, one Gabriel Charmed. Though not well remembered now, Charme was a very influential French journalist who travelled widely and wrote on a number of subjects. And he was really keen on the Jeune Ecole. In a book he wrote in 1886 on naval reform, Charme said, "It would be a wise policy in shipbuilding for the purposes of war to put aside the complicated ironclad built to perform several functions, costly yet possessing but limited speed, and to build a large number of special vessels, gunboats and cruisers, all designed to use with the greatest effect one weapon only, and all having the greatest possible speed. In pursuing such a policy, we shall improve results and reduce expenditure." Charmes and Orb certainly had a point. Throughout the 19th century, the French had consistently been unable to match the British High Seas Fleet, and with increasing European problems with the creation and rise of the new Imperial German state next door, would never be able to do so and meet their military requirements on land. Le Jeune Ecole offered not just a potential solution, but one that had been proven in multiple conflicts around the world. Indeed, in the Tonkin War of 1884 to 85, the French themselves had used spar torpedo boats to good effect against the Chinese, damaging several modern ironclads that the Chinese had purchased from European builders. This experience, backed up by usage of torpedoes in other naval conflicts of the time that had proven successful, did seem to validate the idea that small torpedo vessels were capable of dealing with capital ships. So, we have a new military technology that offers to overturn the existing paradigm and which appears to have been successfully proven on several occasions. As a result, it picks up a lot of attention and is championed by charismatic members of the public who in turn succeed in bringing attention and support for the new concept to national attention and successfully push through their ideas. I'm guessing you can see why I am drawing parallels between the Jeune Ecole and the current situation. Because just as UAVs and drones have shown tremendous advances in recent years and are now widely used in conflicts, often being critical in successful campaigns fought in Nagorno-Karabakh, Ukraine, and most recently in Syria, it is a dangerous thing to assume that these situations represent the standard in major power warfare. And this became painfully obvious to the French soon after they began to pursue the policies espoused by the Jeune Ecole. For starters, you had the rapid development of countermeasures. Capital ships began to mount substantial batteries of small, low-caliber, quick-firing guns, as well as machine guns. These could barely scratch the paintwork on another battle wagon, but they could absolutely shred a small torpedo boat. You also saw the development of another new type of vessel, the torpedo boat destroyer. These were an intermediate-sized vessel, bigger than the torpedo boats but with similar speeds and much greater firepower. They in turn would ultimately also end up shipping torpedoes and became a critical part in most navies, being capable of operating independently in support of fleet actions and as escorts to civilian shipping. But in the late 19th century, their development, as well as the shipping of anti-torpedo boat batteries on capital ships, meant that the French ideas of matching Royal Naval dominance with a cheap counter were quickly overcome. And worse, it left the French at a significant disadvantage in power projection. In 1898, British and French forces entered a standoff in Sudan, the Fashoda incident. With tensions escalating, it looked like the Jeune Ecole's theories may be put to the test, and the French and Royal Navies find themselves embroiled in conflict. But in the real world, the Jeune Ecole's ideas, on paper seeming pretty sensible, proved useless. It was apparent that the French torpedo and cruiser squadrons were not going to be able to influence any war to any great degree, nor be able to do much to protect French ports or possessions from the Royal Navy. Meanwhile, their battle fleet, which had suffered due to the influence of the Jeune Ecole, was recognised as representing nothing more than target practice for the much more numerous British battleships should hostilities break out, and thus unable to contribute anything worthwhile as well. The result was a humiliating climb down for France, as the German Kaiser was reputed to have said. Poor France. She acknowledges herself beaten without a shot having been fired. The lessons were well driven home, and that was that the fielding of torpedo boats and later submarines didn't displace the big and expensive battleship. They complemented and enhanced it, just as it had occurred in the past with other military technological developments. So let's return to Musk's statements. He believes that unmanned aircraft and drones should now be the only thing to concentrate on, that the manned aircraft is dead based upon technological developments. The trouble with this is that if common counters come along, which seems likely as everyone is working on them and for which the technology is also racing along at breakneck speed, then throwing all of your eggs in the drone basket would be a very silly mistake to make indeed. And as for independent AI controlled military aircraft, well, the Americans, and assumably others, are working on AI flown fighters, including having conducted test flights already. But this is early days in the field, and you don't throw all of your defense potential into a single new technology just because it seems cool. Unless you want to end up like the French at Fashoda. No, what you do is see how to integrate good new ideas and technology into your existing systems and synergize them. This allows your military to retain their capabilities while enhancing them. As the new technology matures, it opens further possibilities, and perhaps one day it will displace the current order. And that is exactly what is currently happening in combat aircraft. Nations are developing unmanned aircraft like the MQ-28 Ghostbat, which don't replace manned ones, they work alongside them to provide a single pilot with a huge increase in capability and survivability. Obviously, to get the most out of UAVs flying alongside and being commanded by an accompanying pilot, said pilot will need a top notch aircraft of their own with the very latest electronics and network integration. So, something like this shit design then. If you want to know more about the Jeune Ecole, click the upcoming video link to Dr. Clark's informal lecture, and if you have questions about the F-35, then follow a couple of folks on X or Blue Sky who go by the handles of Doha and Heat Loss. Both are great sources on aviation stuff. Have a good one, folks.